The Titanic has been sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean for over a century, in a location we have known exactly since 1985. We have submarines that can reach it. We have cranes that can lift entire city blocks. We have raised sunken ships far larger and far older than the Titanic. So why is one of the most famous shipwrecks in human history still down there, untouched, more than 3.5 kilometers below the surface? The answer isn't that it's impossible. The answer is a lot stranger, and a lot more final than that. On the 15th of April 1912, the RMS Titanic sank on its very first voyage, taking over 1,500 people down with it. For 73 years, nobody knew exactly where it landed. Then, in 1985, a joint American-French expedition led by Robert Ballard finally located the wreck, split into two massive pieces on the ocean floor, roughly 370 miles off the coast of Newfoundland. Since then, dozens of expeditions have visited it, filmed it, mapped it centimeter by centimeter, and even recovered thousands of small artifacts from the debris field around it. We know precisely where every major piece is. Raising it should, in theory, just be a matter of engineering. Here's the first brutal obstacle: depth. The Titanic doesn't rest in shallow coastal water. It sits about 3,800 meters down, nearly 2.5 miles beneath the surface. At that depth, the water pressure is more than 380 times what you feel at sea level, crushing enough to implode a submarine hull in an instant if something goes wrong. A fact the world was reminded of in 2023. Any recovery operation has to survive that pressure at every single stage, using specialized deep-sea equipment that is expensive, rare, and genuinely dangerous to operate. This alone rules out almost every normal salvage method used on shallower wrecks. Even if you solved the depth problem, you'd run into the wreck itself. The Titanic didn't sink in one piece. As it went down, immense stress ripped the ship apart, and the bow and stern separated, landing about 600 meters from each other on the seafloor. Both sections hit the bottom with tremendous force. The stern, in particular, is a mangled, twisted ruin, barely recognizable as part of a ship. You wouldn't be raising the Titanic. You'd be attempting to raise two enormous, severely damaged fragments of it, independently, from one of the most hostile environments on the planet. Here's the part most people don't know. The ship is actively dissolving. A specific type of iron-eating bacteria, since named Halomonas titanica after the wreck, has colonized the hull and is steadily consuming the metal, producing strange icicle-like formations of rust called rusticles. Marine scientists estimate the ship is losing hundreds of pounds of structural iron every single day. Some researchers believe major sections could collapse entirely within the coming decades. In other words, every year that passes, there is measurably less Titanic to raise, and structurally, what remains is far weaker than the deceptively solid outline you see in photographs. It's not like nobody's dreamed up a plan. Since the wreck's discovery, engineers and entrepreneurs have proposed genuinely wild recovery schemes, pumping millions of ping-pong balls into the hull for buoyancy, injecting it with wax or liquid nitrogen to freeze and float it, attaching giant balloons or electromagnets. Every single one ran into the same wall. The hull is far too fragile, far too corroded, and far too enormous to survive the stress of actually being lifted. Engineers who study the wreck consistently conclude that any large-scale lifting attempt would almost certainly cause it to crumble apart before it ever reached the surface. Then there's the plain economics. Estimates for a serious raising attempt run into the many hundreds of millions, possibly billions of dollars, once you account for specialized deep-sea vessels, engineering research, years of planning, and the very real risk of total failure. And at the end of all that spending, what would you actually have? Not a restorable ship, a disintegrating pile of rusted steel that could never sail, be displayed intact, or even be safely moved without more damage. No government or private company has ever concluded the payoff is remotely worth that price tag. And this is the reason that actually ends the conversation. The Titanic is a mass grave. Well over 1,500 people died in the sinking, and while most bodies were never recovered from the wreck itself, the site is widely treated, ethically and increasingly legally, as a memorial to those lives. Human remains have occasionally been documented near the debris field. Disturbing the wreck to physically raise it risks disturbing that grave, and for many descendants of victims, along with much of the public, that alone makes any serious attempt feel less like engineering and more like desecration. Because of exactly that concern, the wreck is no longer a legal free-for-all. In 2012, the 100th anniversary of the sinking triggered UNESCO protections under a treaty covering underwater cultural heritage. Then, in 2019, an agreement between the United States and the United Kingdom went further, formally restricting entry into the wreck and requiring permits for any activity affecting it. What was once open ocean, visited by anyone with the technology to reach it, is now a legally safeguarded historic site. Raising it isn't just a question of, can you anymore? It's a question of, are you even allowed to? So instead of raising the ship, the entire scientific approach has shifted toward documenting it before it disappears. Expeditions now use high-resolution sonar and thousands of photographs to build detailed 3D digital scans of the wreck exactly as it exists today. The goal isn't recovery anymore, it's preservation through data. In a strange way, the Titanic is being saved after all, just not physically. It's being turned into a permanent digital record before the ocean finishes the job the iceberg started. Put all of this together and the real answer to why hasn't anyone raised the Titanic isn't a single dramatic obstacle. It's 5 obstacles stacked on top of each other: crushing depth, a hull broken in 2, bacteria actively eating the remaining structure, a price tag with no realistic return, and, above everything else, the fact that it's a grave. Any one of those alone might be solvable with enough money and engineering. All 5 together have made it, for over a century, simply not worth attempting, and every year, physically less possible than the year before. So the Titanic will almost certainly never come back to the surface. It will keep dissolving quietly year after year, until eventually there's nothing structural left to raise at all, just a rust stain and a debris field on the ocean floor. In 100 more years, the ship that once seemed unsinkable might have no hull left whatsoever. Ever wondered what other impossible-to-lose pieces of history are disappearing right now, in places we simply aren't watching?